3 attendant officers then came forward, bearing a stand of the kind used in the temple for offerings, on which, wrapped in paper, lay the wakizashi, the short sword or dirk of the Japanese, 9 inches and a half in length, with a point and an edge as sharp as a razor's. This he handed, prostrating himself, to the condemned man, who received it reverently, raising it to his head with both hands, and placed it in front of himself. After another profound obeisance, Taki Zenzaburo, in a voice which betrayed just so much emotion and hesitation as might be expected from a man who is making a painful confession, but with no sign of either in his face or manner, spoke as follows: "I, and I alone, unwarrantably gave the order to fire on the foreigners at Kobe, and again as they tried to escape. For this crime I disembowel myself, and I beg you who are present to do me the honor of witnessing the act." Bowing once more, the speaker allowed his upper garments to slip down to his girdle, and remained naked to the waist. Carefully, according to custom, he tucked his sleeve under his knees to prevent himself from falling backward, for a noble Japanese gentleman should die falling forwards. Deliberately, with a steady hand, he took the dirk that lay before him. He looked at it wistfully, almost affectionately. For a moment he seemed to collect his thoughts for the last time, and then, stepping himself deeply below the waist, in the left-hand side, he drew the dirk slowly across to his right side, and turning it in the wound, gave a slight cut upwards. During this sickeningly painful operation, he never moved a muscle of his face. When he drew out the dirk, he leaned forward and stretched out his neck. An expression of pain for the first time crossed his face, but he uttered no sound. At that moment the kaishaku, who, still crouching by his side, had been keenly watching his every movement, sprang to his feet, poised his sword for a second in the air. There was a flash, a heavy, ugly thud, a crashing fall. With one blow the head had been severed from the body. A dead silence followed, broken only by the hideous noise of the blood throbbing out of the inert head before us, which but a moment before had been a brave and chivalrous man. It was horrible. The kaishaku made a low bow, wiped his sword with a piece of paper which he had ready for the purpose, and retired from the raised floor, and the stained dirk was solemnly borne away, a bloody proof of the execution. The 2 representatives of the Mikado then left their places, and crossing over to where the foreign witnesses sat, called to us to witness that the sentence of death upon Taki Zenzaburo had been faithfully carried out. The ceremony being at an end, we left the temple. I might multiply any number of descriptions of seppuku from literature or from the relation of eyewitnesses, but one more instance will suffice. 2 brothers, Sakon and Naiki, respectively 24 and 17 years of age, made an effort to kill Ieyasu in order to avenge their father's wrongs, but before they could enter the camp they were made prisoners. The old general admired the pluck of the youths who dared an attempt on his life, and ordered that they should be allowed to die an honorable death. Their little brother Hachimaro, a mere infant of 8 summers, was condemned to a similar fate, as the sentence was pronounced on all the male members of the family, and the 3 were taken to a monastery where it was to be executed. A physician who was present on the occasion has left us a diary from which the following scene is translated. When they were all seated in a row for final dispatch, Sakon turned to the youngest and said, "Go thou first, for I wish to be sure that thou dost it aright." Upon the little one's replying that, as he had never seen seppuku performed, he would like to see his brothers do it, and then he could follow them, the older brothers smiled between their tears. "Well said, little fellow. So canst thou well boast of being our father's child." When they had placed him between them, Sakon thrust the dagger into the left side of his own abdomen and asked, "Look, brother, dost understand now? Only, don't push the dagger too far, lest thou fall back. Lean forward, rather, and keep thy knees well composed." Naiki did likewise, and said to the boy, "Keep thy eyes open, or else thou mayst look like a dying woman. If thy dagger feels anything within, and thy strength fails, Take courage, and double thy effort to cut across." The child looked from one to the other, and when both had expired, he calmly half denuded himself and followed the example set him on either hand. The glorification of seppuku offered, naturally enough, no small temptation to its unwarranted committal. For causes entirely incompatible with reason, or for reasons entirely undeserving of death, hot-headed youths rushed into it as insects fly into fire. Mixed and dubious motives drove more samurai to this deed than nuns into convent gates. Life was cheap, cheap as reckoned by the popular standard of honor. The saddest feature was that honor, which was always in the agio, so to speak, was not always solid gold, but alloyed with baser metals. No one circle in the Inferno will boast of greater density of Japanese population than the seventh, to which Dante consigns all victims of self-destruction. And yet, for a true samurai to hasten death or to court it was alike cowardice. A typical fighter, when he lost battle after battle, and was pursued from plain to hill, and from bush to cavern, found himself hungry and alone in the dark hollow of a tree, his sword blunt with use, his bow broken and arrows exhausted. Did not the noblest of the Romans fall upon his own sword in Philippi under like circumstances? Deemed it cowardly to die, but with a fortitude approaching a Christian martyr's, cheered himself with an impromptu verse: "Come, evermore come, ye dread sorrows and pains, and heap on my burdened back, that I not one test my lack of what strength in me remains." This, then, was the Bushido teaching: bear and face all calamities and adversities with patience and a pure conscience, for as Mencius thought, when heaven is about to confer a great office on anyone, it first exercises his mind with suffering, and his sinews and bones with toil. It exposes his body to hunger, and subjects him to extreme poverty, and it confounds his undertakings. In all these ways it stimulates his mind, hardens his nature, and supplies his incompetencies. True honor lies in fulfilling heaven's decree, and no death incurred in so doing is ignominious, whereas death to avoid what heaven has in store is cowardly indeed. In that quaint book of Sir Thomas Browne's, Religio Medici, there is an exact English equivalent for what is repeatedly taught in our precepts. Let me quote it. "It is a brave act of valor to condemn death, but where life is more terrible than death, it is then the truest valor to dare to live." A renowned priest of the 17th century satirically observed, "Talk as he may, a samurai who ne'er has died is apt in decisive moments to flee or hide." Again, him who once has died in the bottom of his breast, no spears of Sanada, nor all the arrows of Tametomo can pierce. How near we come to the portals of the temple whose builder taught, "He that loseth his life for my sake shall find it." These are but a few of the numerous examples which tend to confirm the moral identity of the human species, notwithstanding an attempt so assiduously made to render the distinction between Christian and pagan as great as possible. We have thus seen that the Bushido institution of suicide was neither so irrational nor barbarous as its abuse strikes us at first sight. We will now see whether its sister institution of redress, or call it revenge if you will, has its mitigating features. I hope I can dispose of this question in a few words, since a similar institution, or call it custom if that suits you better, has at some time prevailed among all people and has not yet become entirely obsolete, as attested by the continuance of dueling and lynching. Why has not an American captain recently challenged Esterhazy that the wrongs of Dreyfus be avenged? Among a savage tribe which has no marriage, adultery is not a sin, and only the jealousy of a lover protects a woman from abuse. So in a time which has no criminal court, murder is not a crime, and only the vigilant vengeance of the victim's people preserves social order. "What is the most beautiful thing on earth?" said Osiris to Horus. The reply was, "To avenge a parent's wrongs," to which a Japanese would have added, "and a master's." In revenge there is something which satisfies one's sense of justice.